Over the course of over 28 years since its founding, the UFC has hosted hundreds of fights. Regretfully, not all planned fights end up going as expected. We'll be looking at some of the most prominent matchups that never actually occurred in this episode. Without further ado, let's look at 10 huge fights that were sadly cancelled, listed in no particular order. Number 10. Conor McGregor's Rafael dos Anjos. Initially, UFC 196 was supposed to feature a highly anticipated fight between featherweight champion Conor McGregor challenging Rafael dos Anjos for the lightweight belt. The Irishman had recently established himself as the sport's biggest star after defeating Jose Aldo for the featherweight title. Conversely, Dos Anjos was in the midst of one of the most impressive runs in lightweight history, having won 5 in a row over the likes of Dan Henderson, Nate Diaz, and Anthony Pettis. Had the two met, it would have been just the second time in UFC history that active champions would compete for a title, with BJ Penn and Georges Pierre being the first. Unfortunately, a broken foot forced the Brazilian to withdraw, and the fight was sadly never rescheduled. Of course, Dos Anjos' replacement was none other than Nate Diaz, who defeated McGregor at UFC 196. Number 9. Anthony Johnson vs. Jon Jones. Back in 2015, when the card for UFC 187 was being constructed, light heavyweight champion Jon Jones looked unstoppable, having secured 8 consecutive title defenses, along with a win over the previously undefeated Daniel Cormier. However, one of the most compelling matchups for Jones was heavy-handed contender Anthony "Rumble" Johnson. Sure, Jones had a more well-rounded skill set, but fans knew that a knockout artist like Johnson only needed one good shot to end his impressive run. Prior to being scheduled to face the champion at UFC 187, Johnson was fresh off back-to-back first-round knockouts over Antonio Nogueira and Alexander Gustafsson. Sadly, the bout never happened, as Jones would be involved in his infamous hit-and-run incident that resulted in a lengthy suspension. The incident would be the first of many high-profile setbacks for the troubled MMA star. His suspension resulted in a vacated title, which Daniel Cormier captured by defeating Johnson at UFC 187. Number 8. Jon Jones vs. Dan Henderson. UFC 151 is known to fight fans as the first event in the promotion's history to be cancelled. Perhaps the most memorable moment surrounding the ill-fated card was Dana White's reaction, calling out Jon Jones and his coach Greg Jackson for refusing to face Chael Sonnen as a replacement, which would have ultimately saved the pay-per-view. However, some fans may have forgotten that the card was initially supposed to feature a dream fight between surging light heavyweight champion Jon Jones and former Pride legend Dan Henderson. Much to the dismay of many, a ruptured meniscus forced Hendo to bow out, which set the stage for the Chael Sonnen replacement controversy. Though Henderson continued to compete for several years after the scheduled event, the fight with Jon Jones was never rebooked. That said, he did end up competing in a jiu-jitsu contest later on, which Jones won with an arm triangle choke. Number 7. Junior Dos Santos vs. Brock Lesnar. The Ultimate Fighter reality series usually helps build plenty of anticipation for the eventual contest between the coaches. Season 13 helped garner interest in an already intriguing matchup between two of the biggest names in heavyweight history, Brock Lesnar and Junior Dos Santos. With their stint as coaches ended, the two were set to meet at UFC 131 in 2011. Unfortunately, Lesnar's highly publicized bout with diverticulitis, a gastrointestinal disease, forced the former UFC champion to withdraw. Dos Santos would instead face and defeat Shane Carwin via unanimous decision. Though Lesnar would eventually return to the octagon, the bout was sadly never rescheduled. Number 6. Dustin Poirier vs. Nate Diaz. Two of the biggest names in their division, if not the entire sport of mixed martial arts, are Dustin the Diamond Poirier and Nate Diaz. In August 2018, the UFC announced that the two stars would serve as the co-main event of UFC 230 held at the iconic Madison Square Garden. However, in an unfortunate twist of fate, their date at MSG was cancelled when a hip injury forced Poirier out of the fight. Instead, a middleweight contest between Chris Weidman and Jaquer Sosa would serve as a replacement on the card. Remarkably, roughly 4 years after its initial conception, there is still plenty of interest among fans in a Poirier vs. Diaz meeting. In fact, both men were asking the UFC to rebook the fight earlier this year, which means we may yet see these legends meet in the octagon. Number 5. Jose Aldo vs. Anthony Pettis. For those who love dynamic striking matchups, the scheduled bout between Jose Aldo and Anthony "Showtime" Pettis back in 2013 was a potential dream fight in many ways. Despite coming off a highlight reel knockout over Donald Cerrone and being next in line for a lightweight title shot, Pettis instead decided to drop down to featherweight and challenge Jose Aldo for the belt. The The two were set to serve as the main event of UFC 163. Tragically, a knee injury forced Pettis out of the bout, who was replaced by the Korean zombie Chan Sung-ju. The setback denied fans a bout between two of the most exciting fighters in the business at the time. Still, Pettis wouldn't have to wait long to win gold. Roughly 3 weeks after UFC 163, the Milwaukee native defeated Dan Henderson in his hometown to capture the lightweight title at the very next pay-per-view. Number 4. Robert Whittaker vs. Luke Rockhold. One of the biggest middleweight bouts that never happened was a scheduled showdown between then-champion Robert Whittaker and former title holder Luke Rockhold. When the bout was conceived, Rockhold was just one fight removed from losing the title to Michael Bisping, but was victorious in 7 of his last 8 appearances. On the other side of the equation, Whittaker looked to be an unstoppable champion who had won 8 straight in the UFC. Moreover, the bout was scheduled to take place in Whittaker's home country of Australia at UFC 221. Unfortunately, an injury caused Whittaker to bow out. Instead, Yoel Romero would step in as a replacement and defeat Rockhold via third-round knockout. It would mark the beginning of a career downturn for Luke Rockhold, forcing the UFC to shy away from rebooking the Whittaker bout at a later date. Number 3. Dominic Cruz vs. Renato. UFC 169's original headliner was supposed to be a bantamweight clash between Dominic Cruz and Renan the Baron Barão, with the title on the line. It's important to remember that this was the 2014 interim champion version of the Baron, a man who was unbeaten in the UFC, sporting a remarkable 31-1-1 record overall. We're not talking about the version of the Brazilian who lost his last 5 bouts in the promotion prior to being released. For his part, Cruz was already regarded as one of the all-time greats in the bantamweight division, having been a dominant champion for many years, making this a potential matchup for the ages. Of course, the injury-plagued Cruz would be unable to compete courtesy of a pulled groin. By the time Cruz was recovered to a point where he was fighting consistently again, Barão's career had unfortunately begun to falter, thus lessening interest in the showdown fans once craved. Number 2. Shogun vs. Rashad Evans. For years, both Sugar Rashad Evans and Mauricio Shogun were two of the very best in the UFC's light heavyweight division. While both men were active with the organization in their respective primes, surprisingly, the former champions' paths never crossed. That said, the UFC tried to make Evans of Shogun a reality on multiple occasions. The two were initially supposed to compete at UFC 128 in 2011. Had it gone down, the fight would have been Shogun's first attempt at defending his newly won light heavyweight title. However, when Evans suffered a knee injury, the fight was scrapped. Rashad was ultimately replaced by Jon Jones, who would become the youngest champion in UFC history by defeating Shogun. Roughly 5 years later at UFC on FOX 19, the promotion tried booking the fight for a second time. This time around, it would be the Pride legend who pulled out due to injury. As it stands, the fight will go down as potentially one of the best light heavyweight bouts we never got to see. Number 1. Khabib Nurmagomedov Tony Ferguson. There isn't a more ill-fated matchup in MMA history than Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov. A fight between the two lightweight megastars was booked by the UFC 5 times, but tragically never materialized. The bout was initially scheduled back in 2015 for the Ultimate Fighter Season 22 final, but Khabib was forced to withdraw after suffering an injury. The fight was then rebooked in April of 2016. However, this time around it was Ferguson, who dropped out due to a lung issue. In 2017, the two were once again set to face off at UFC 209 for the interim lightweight title. Unfortunately, the fight fell through after Khabib became ill due to a bad weight cut. A year later, the fight was booked for the 4th time at UFC 223, but was tragically canceled yet again after Ferguson suffered an injury to his knee. The bout was scheduled for a 5th and final time in May of 2020 at UFC 249. Unfortunately, travel restrictions due to COVID prevented the two from competing. Now, in light of Khabib's retirement combined with Ferguson's recent decline, we will forever be left wondering what would have happened if the two met in their primes. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please be sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing to our channel. Apart from that, that is so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.